So welcome to the next leg of our Prime UK and Ireland Working Group tour. Today we're we're ready for a real treat, is what I'm trying to say with this particular working group on business and human rights. Dorothy Baumann-Polly. Now I wanted to ask you, Dorothy, how you pronounce your surname. Can you do that for me?
Dorothy Baumann-Polly, correct.
Dorothy Baumann-Polly, who is the working group lead, will begin shortly telling us all about the working group, how to get involved, the representation from our UK and Ireland members. And please, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask or any comments, feel free to put those into the chat as we go. And then it's our absolute privilege to be hearing from one of the active working group members from our Prime UK and I community, Lara Bianchi from the University of Nottingham. So that will give us a real insight into the research, teaching, applications that this working group is involved in. So if you're just coming into the room, please feel free to add your name into the chat. Any questions, any comments you've got at any time. But at this point, over to Dorothy. Please do introduce yourself and all of your wonderful accomplishments.
Karen, thanks to you first for setting this up. I think it's a fantastic initiative to introduce your chapter to the various working groups. I've been co-leading the working group on business and human rights since it was relaunched about 5 years ago. It existed years before, then there was a pause and it was relaunched. And I'm really happy to do today's session with Lara, who indeed has been such a fantastic collaborator to advance this work. Let me share my screen. Someone else is sharing. So Karen, do you mind closing yours? And then I say a few more words about myself and the institution I'm directing.
I'm not sure that I am sharing. I just pinned you. I'll remove the spotlight, but I'm not sharing that I'm aware of.
So someone else is sharing.
Possibly I was. My apologies. There you go.
Thank you. Here we go. Share. Now I can open my slides. Perfect. All right. So a few words about me. I have worked in the broader field of business human rights in academia and in practice for over 2 decades. But in 2013, I joined the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights, which was the first human rights center for human rights center at a business school, I think in the world. And the idea to bring human rights to business school education was born from the idea that, well, clearly, you know, in a world where future managers should know how to navigate human rights, we need to integrate that in business school curriculums as well. And the NYU Stern Center has been inspiring, I think, many other schools to join us on this mission, including the center that I'm now directing, the Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights. I brought the idea from NYU to Geneva 5 years ago, 2019, and we launched NYU's sister organization there. Right now, I think NYU and Geneva are the only fully institutionalized centers for business and human rights at business schools, but we have also created a growing network of allies that today comprises, let me show you this, over 120 business schools from around the world in 37 countries. So we have allies all over the globe, and we're really proud of that and would like to continue growing this network. So at the very start, and I'll say this in the end again, warm invitation to join us. It's an open, informal network in that there's no membership fee, there are no requirements. If you sign up, you will get a regular newsletter from us. You're invited to events, you're invited to potential like trainings or webinars. So it's only service and little obligation. You may involve yourself as much as you like. If you want to consider joining, and again, I can come back to that at the end, we were lucky to build this network with the help of the Global Business School Network, GBSN. They have created the infrastructure for us to, for example, send out newsletters and do events. GBSN comprises, I think, 150 business schools around the world, and there's some overlap in our participation, but not fully. But for GBSN, I think what Dan Leclerc, the head of GBSN, would say is that we are an embodiment of the type of work that GBSN wants to promote, develop solutions to business challenges that business schools should address, and human rights, he believes, is one important area. So we've been receiving really fantastic support from them. And Juliana is our contact person at GBSN, and she also manages our membership database. And if you would, if you're interested in receiving all the information about what we do, ideally you contact Juliana directly. You can copy me on it, but she would be happy to just add you to our list of distributions. Maybe a bit more background on the connection between GBSN and Prime. As I said at the beginning, Prime had a business human rights network for some time. It then died down because the two coordinators, one left academia, the other one got distracted, I think. And so there was like a long pause. And then as Mette Morsing came on board, she looked at this and said, no, I mean, the UN Global Compact, and Prime is sort of a sister organization of the UN Global Compact, is so much about human rights. We should absolutely also have a Prime chapter on business and human rights. It was also a time at which business human rights really gained momentum as a field because of the adoption of the UN guiding principles for business and human rights that were then, have now been codified into mandatory laws through the EU. You may have heard that in July, the European Union adopted the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which really legally requires companies to look into their human rights impacts. And with this on the horizon, Mette was like, we need to revive. And then she looked around. I knew Mette from times that I was in academia. And she said, of course, you and Michael Posner, the director of the NYU Stern Center, are sort of the obvious people who should, revive this business human rights working group. And then we explained to Mette, but we already created our own network because we believe, this needs community. More business schools should work with us. And at this point, we pragmatically decided to merely join forces. We had an MOU with Prime, and our network became also the Prime Working Group on Business Human Rights. And because this is a bit of a complicated history and may confuse some people, we have created let me flip to this, a frequently asked question document, which you can find on our website. This is the document on the right. But on the left, more foundationally, is what we call a toolkit that makes the case for human rights and business education. And this is a foundational document for our work with the entire network, which explains why we believe human rights matter for business school education, how some business schools have integrated human rights in the curriculum, and also, real testimonies of schools that also describe challenges and how they've overcome that integration process. So these are two documents that you can get from the GBSN website. I will provide the links later. Let me now get back to, sorry that I'm flipping around my slides. Let me get back to this slide. So how are we hoping to advance human rights in business school education? We have developed a range of strategies how to advance that integration. One being we started out realizing that for instructors to bring human rights into existing classes, there's just no dedicated teaching materials. So it's not so easy to take this on, even if you're interested as an instructor. The typical case studies and the most popular case studies, let's say from Harvard, they're there are not many that deal specifically with human rights challenges. So we decided to create our own teaching materials, and I will show you some of the things that we've collaboratively developed later on. We also believe it would be really, really impactful if we could activate the private sector. And honestly, as I took on this role with Mike via Mette, we were hoping that the UN Global Compact would be a closer ally in doing this. After all, Prime is sort of the little sister of the UN Global Compact, and I believe Global Compact member companies should be most inclined to also very explicitly and publicly say that they want to see human rights taught at business schools. The connection to the UN Global Compact, I think, has always been a bit complicated between Prime and the UN Global Compact. So this hasn't happened yet at a large scale, but for our network, we developed a new function, namely the function of ambassadors, where we ask often retired business executives to support our work and to talk about our work, and particularly in business fora, and say there's so much effort now in practice to adopt human rights due diligence procedures. One way how business could also advance this work is to support business school education, basically get to the root of the root. Another important strategy for us is to support the adoption of human rights in subdisciplines of management. Look, I'm teaching business human rights. I taught it at NYU. I'm now teaching it in Geneva in the bachelor program, in the master program, but I don't think it's realistic that in an overcrowded curriculum, many schools will add a dedicated class on business human rights. I might also not have a person who can teach this, and I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but I think it's more important is find ways how to bring human rights to the existing and routinely taught subdisciplines of management, such as finance, accounting, supply chain management. I mean, to me, a supply chain management class today should not only talk about how to optimize logistics, but also how to develop responsible purchasing practices. So this could be one anchor for an existing class to also dedicate one class or one module or even just half an hour on a human rights lens on supply chain management. And we actually have a group of accounting professors in our network who have been promising to me for a while to develop a toolkit for the accounting discipline, to really spell out what would it mean to teach human rights in an accounting class, something I couldn't explain to you because I don't have that background, but it would be great to have such a model, to really highlight what does human rights mean for accounting. And if any of you would like to take this on for your subdiscipline, finance, or maybe supply chain management, I'd be most grateful to have sort of a one-pager guidance or 2 pages that help other instructors in your discipline to also adopt this lens. We would also love to establish regional hubs because we realize that particularly for teaching resources, it's relevant that they're locally relevant. So to contextualize, it's helpful to have, cases of companies that are from the region, or talk about human rights challenges that are specific to a region, use cases that are in the news in a specific region. So we've been developing this model with Qatar University, which actually leads an alliance of 14 other business schools in the region. And they have developed a casebook of locally relevant cases. I think there are 12 or so, which will be published shortly. And we have someone in Latin America who will hopefully replicate this in terms of developing a global movement to adopt human rights in business school education. I think some regional hubs would be really helpful. What also would be great is if students would make the case. I mean, my classes are full. The students in Geneva are embracing the fact that we offer business human rights as an elective in the bachelor and master program, but generally finding ways to use the student voices. And I think that next generation, is at least what I'm observing, they are quite keen to get trained on how to navigate human rights in the business context. If you could find a way to capture that, that would be great. Of course, also for deans, accreditation organizations are powerful drivers. If accreditation organizations require schools to adopt new ways, they're probably more likely to do so. The ASCSB accreditation organization, as you may know, has more focus on societal impact teaching and research than ever, and explaining how, you know, a focus on business human rights actually delivers on, you know, societal impact research and teaching, I think can help to make the connection for a dean that is probably very narrowly focused on, well, what does an accreditation organization require? I know from Lara in the UK, it's the funding organizations that also are very interested in general sort of grand societal challenges and societal impact. So again, a dean that is narrowly focused on how can we get money or acquire funds for this, you might be in a particularly good position because your national funding organization has such a dedicated focus on societal impact. And then, of course, lastly, and that's something that we've been doing since we launched the NYU Stern Center for Business Human Rights, is public advocacy. We are writing about the need to bring human rights to business school education in various outlets. Maybe my colleague Pascal, who's on the call, can briefly post the latest piece that I find quite powerful in Poets and Quants. It's a higher education outlet about the book that Michael Posner, the co-lead of our network, has just published, and in an interview explains how the book distills the work of the NYU Stern Center, but also our broader vision of bringing human rights to business school education. The book is actually called Corporate Conscience Incorporated. I have the little book flyer here. And this article in Poets and Quants sort of contextualizes this publication. All right. I've shown you this, the foundational document and the frequently asked question document. There will be time in the end to ask me any question you like. One thing we do every year is to bring the network together in person. We do this always in November on the side of the UN Forum for Business and Human Rights. This is for the business human rights field, the biggest gathering at the UN in Geneva. And the University of Geneva has hosted, I think, 8 times now, this annual meeting of our network. This is actually how the network also grew. And of course, since COVID, we offer a hybrid option. So even if you cannot travel to Geneva, you could participate. And last year in November, we had the honor and pleasure to have with us the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, as you can see here. And he really lent his full support to the work that we are doing, and it meant a lot to us. Because of course, if the highest authority for human rights thinks human rights in business school education is a key driver for advancing human rights in practice, this is a powerful signal. And the next meeting will be on November 24, in case you want to mark your calendars. As I said, there's always a hybrid option to participate. What we've also done a few years ago is to break down our growing network. I said there are about 120 schools, about 300 individuals affiliated with us, into research clusters. This was a request that came out of an in-person annual meeting around specific interests, specific themes. Earlier I mentioned we have a group of accountants, and they have actually developed a research cluster, as we call it, on accounting, finance, and investments. The 2 leads are John Ferguson and Yingru Lee. Maybe these are 2 colleagues from the UK, so you may be familiar with them. in total, our network actually has strong UK participation already. Pascal did a quick check, and there are about 20 schools from the UK are currently participating in our work. Myself and my colleague Berit Knaak are leading a cluster around agriculture. What we do is we just get together every 3 to 6 months to exchange news on our research. So there are a bunch of researchers that, for example, look into child labor in agriculture, and we actually do a little online, get together to see what everyone is working on, research presentations, and we would also love to see if we could jointly apply for funding at some point. So that would be the gold standard. We do have a research cluster on climate change, human rights, and fair transitions. This group actually has a fantastic event coming up at the end of February at the University of Connecticut. Again, I'm looking at Pascal to hopefully provide that link either now or to Karen later, in case that's of interest to you. Some sessions are, you can participate online if that's an area that you're particularly interested in. So looking at the energy transition from a human rights perspective, many of you will be familiar with the just transition term. So we clearly think that intersection between environment and social needs to be worked out further, and there should be a strong human rights lens on many things we're currently discussing around the energy transition. Then I said Laura is such an active member. She's been leading our gender research cluster. We have a cluster on the extractive sector, a cluster on supply chains, which is super active. They have a WhatsApp group that is posting news almost daily. And we have a cluster on human rights and technology, which is interestingly, although this is such a hot topic, not super active because we cannot find enough people who actually do research on human rights in the technology sector at business schools. So there are many other departments at universities that do research on this, but not enough in the business school context yet with the human rights lens. So that I generally find is an interesting observation. Our network is really open to everyone with one condition: you should have, a connection to a business school. Either you're affiliated with a business school, or you're teaching at a business school, or you're teaching to business school students. We have many individuals in our network that, for example, have a law background, but they actually teach human rights at a business school. So that's good enough. We're not super strict, but we do not want legal scholars that are at law schools join our network. Maybe an explanation why. There are other networks that encompass everyone. For example, the Teaching Forum for Business and Human Rights, a great network. I'm part of it too, dedicated to teaching. But it's dominated by, and I have to say, almost 90% of the participants are lawyers. And how they teach human rights to law students is quite different in terms of pedagogy, in terms of methodology, etc. So we think we need to have our own circle because we face other challenges in terms of institutionalizing human rights in the curriculum, but also in terms of how do we teach this to business students that have a very different mindset. Mike, my colleague at NYU Stern, he teaches a class to business and to law students, and he always says, within 5 minutes, I can tell who's who. The business students want to cut a deal, and the law students want to regulate and litigate. So very different approaches. All right, let me now get to something that you can profit from immediately, irrespective of you're interested in participating in our network. We produce, as I said, dedicated teaching resources. And here is a case study series that we started at the Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights on companies that have integrated human rights in their business model. And these case studies have been produced without any corporate funding. I think this is important. This is really an independent perspective, but they do focus on what works. In the human rights field, we have a tendency to highlight the violations and the harm that most companies do. This is the stuff you find in the news. But for my business school students, it's really important to also understand what works. I find, looking back, teaching this has become easier and easier. This next generation gets it. They don't want to be part of the problem. They want to know what solutions look like. And so we need to offer them something and inspire them so that they can understand, well, what does good look like in the business human rights context? And here's a range of cases that outline how some companies have brought human rights to core business operations. Those case studies are available open source. You can find them on our website, and I find them very useful for teaching. And of course, I also distribute it to the network, and they have quite broad uptake, maybe because they're available for free and they're dedicated to this human rights perspective. And then last, I want to draw your attention, as also then the segue to Lara, to teaching resources that we have developed with the ILO, the International Labour Organization. So few years ago, 3 years ago, we signed an MOU with the ILO. The ILO is a mile from the University of Geneva, but for like 50 years, we didn't communicate. And we felt this needs to change. So GBSN, our sort of umbrella organization, the Geneva Center and the ILO signed an MOU to work together on dedicated teaching resources around labor rights issues, because the ILO is the authority for labor rights issues, and they have fantastic knowledge and reports, unfortunately reports that often end up sort of in the drawers of and are not sufficiently looked at. And the ILO, I think, realized for a long-term perspective and the legacy of their work in many countries, they should find a way to ensure that their expertise is also infiltrated into business school teaching. They also supported, for example, the work with Qatar University, and together we have now developed 2 packages of teaching resources around 2 specific labor rights issues. The first one revolves around decent work in the fishing sector. And what you can find on the website, again, these teaching resources are available open source, are a background paper to understand what is the issue, what is the industry, and a slide deck that you could basically plug and play in your teaching. The same is true for a second package on recruitment practices. There, I think the slide deck isn't uploaded yet. There's still some work to do, but again, these are teaching resources that you can fairly easily tailor to your specific context, and we actually invite instructors to share how they tailored these teaching resources to their specific context. They were developed in I would say, novel approach. We actually had a workshop where we co-created those teaching resources with instructors from around the world, sort of a small dedicated group. And they also brought in their specific perspective on the issues. So if you think of fishing, we had someone from South Africa who said we need the port perspective covered. We had someone from Ghana and Indonesia, and they both said we need the perspective of sort of the fish processing plants, but also the actual ships. And well, we in Switzerland, we're in a landlocked country, so explaining why we're teaching fishing required a different hook. So we are using a cat picture, because many of my students would like to work for Nestlé, and Nestlé produces pet food, and the pet food includes fish. And as you may know, Nestlé has been campaigned against due to Thai slaves on fishing boats. So it's that contextualization which makes, and the co-creation of the teaching resources, which makes these packages quite special and unique, I believe. And again, it's something you can look at and also provide your feedback on. I think I'll stop here and hand over to Lara. And I said it's a segue because she actually used a teaching resource that we developed with the ILO, and maybe she wants to comment on how that has been going. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your reactions, questions.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. That's what this whole working series is all about. And you've blown me away with the array of resources and so many calls to action. I can't wait to dig into all of those links you provided. I'm trying to share Lara's slides, but now I need to share, please.
Yes, indeed. I stop share and then over. Here we go.
Whoops, that's not the one I wanted. I can't move that out of the way. PowerPoint, there we go.
That's great. Thank you, Karen.
And thank you, Pascal, for putting all these links in the chat. I just look at this. Great.
I can't see myself, but I trust you can see me. Oh, here I am. Hiya. So my name is Lara. I'm an associate professor in business and society at the University of Nottingham, and I'm pretty excited to be here today presenting the case for human rights education in business schools. And they always tell you trainings on how to deliver fantastic presentations to start with a story. And I thought about it, and then I concluded that the best story to share was mine, and to try and explain how the participation to the PRIME working group, that at the beginning was not the PRIME working group, was something else, really helped and supported my research, teaching, but overall my career really in evolving the way it has. Karen, if you can move to the next slide. So I joined Alliance Manchester Business School in 2016 as program lead for the Business and Human Rights Catalyst program. I don't know if many of you might know that Lord Alliance donated quite a few millions of pounds to get Manchester this brand new fantastic building, but he also donated money to blue sky projects, research projects, and one of which was the Human Rights Catalyst. And the other lead was Professor Ken Fail, who is now the dean at the school. And at the beginning, the program was so blue sky that actually Ken and I were not sure what to do with it. And we asked for help to Doro and Mike Posner, who just set up the center, the Business and Human Rights Center at NYU. And so we started this fantastic collaboration that grew over the year. At the beginning, it was basically just the two of us, the two institutions, and Ken kept bragging, saying we are the first one in Europe, the first business school in Europe working on business and human rights, which was true, but he also felt pretty lonely. And with time and years, the community grew, and now I think what I get out from it is really that sense of belonging and sharing with colleagues from business schools, because business and human rights is definitely dominated, as Doro was mentioning, by legal scholars and political scientists. Nothing against them, but we needed to find a space for business schools to be part of the narrative and part of the game. Karen, next slide, please. I think we had a few game changers, and being featured on the Financial Times was one of that. Professor Mette Morsing, I think, was one of the facilitators for this article to come out. And it was really a moment for us to say, look, we are legitimate. Actually, if the Financial Times says that there is space for human rights in the business school curriculum, it must be true, right? And so that gave us a little bit of boost in pursuing what we were doing in terms of try and encourage more business school scholars to engage in teaching and research around around business and human rights. Next slide, please, Karen. And then in 2019, I joined Nottingham University Business School, and I moved from a research-only contract to a research and teaching contract. And I was made module convener of a module at that time called something like responsible management, so very generic, not very innovative, I thought. And so I asked my director, how far I could go in terms of reshaping the module, and he said, just do whatever you think is more appropriate. And he also said it's an elective, so just play with it and it's fine. And being elective is one of the challenges actually that I keep having around that type of teaching and module delivery, but I will get into that in a second. There is a reason why Nottingham University Business School is one of the very few worldwide to offer business and human rights teaching at least a UG level. And there are challenges that are definitely still there around the business and human rights community in business schools. Next slide, Karen, please. And the first one, in my opinion, is a matter of language or framing. So many of my colleagues are working definitely on themes and topics that I would classify as human rights topics, but they wouldn't. So colleagues working on modern slavery or gender equality, they wouldn't identify as part of the business and human rights movement. And this might also be because business scholars in general, as Florian Wettstein wrote a few years ago now, feel they are not competent because it's so heavily based on legal narrative and legislations and international human rights law that sometimes we feel really not comfortable and not adequate to talk about human rights in a business space. But this is problematic because if we want to work towards a normalization of the human rights language for business managers and leaders, if as business schools we don't feel comfortable in contributing to the normalization, then it becomes, of course, pretty tricky for managers and leaders to do that. And I have to say there is also, it's not all of us, but some colleagues still a lack of recognition of the importance of human rights for business schools and for businesses, and the recognition of that direct responsibility of businesses towards human rights. So human rights is still something, not a business of business schools, and definitely not a business for businesses, which will change, I'm sure about that, but still someone is pretty skeptical about that happening. We are part of the Prime UK and Ireland chapter today, so I couldn't not mention Professor Martin Parker and his book on Shut Down the Business Schools. And I think it's very important. Martin doesn't talk about human rights specifically, but the point he makes on business school degrees seen exclusively as something as a private good, something for the benefit of the student, rather than something that can really make a difference to society. So a degree that is part of a social good system is part of the problem in not recognizing the importance of human rights in teaching, in business school teaching. Next slide, Karen, please. Yes, next. Thank you. And I think part of that is also the lost before translation issue, that usually it's something we apply to research, but I think it applies very much also to teaching. We tend to create and design modules and teaching offer without really consulting on co-creating with practitioners. So we are not always aware of what happens or the needs that the real world is asking students to have in terms of skills and knowledge. And I'm not gonna mention the name of the guy because I didn't ask for permission to quote him, but this is the global head of global head for human rights of a very big multinational who attended one of our meetings in Geneva. And he said, if I want an extra human rights expert, I'm gonna hire a lawyer. I don't need human rights experts per se, but I need my managers to understand what I mean, the basics of human rights, what I mean by human rights risk, so I don't have to explain every time that I present a new project or a new initiative the basics to them of what I'm talking about. So I think business schools at the moment are not offering to big employers these skills and these graduates that do understand their impacts on human rights. Next slide, please, Karen. So I came up with this title for my module, which is a level 2 module, 10 credits, business, human rights, and sustainable development. And the reason why I added sustainable development was because I wanted to make sure that there was a broad acceptance within the business school about what I was delivering. And of course, all our business schools now are very eager to show their commitment to our sustainable development and sustainability. And also because, of course, the human rights community is very conscious of the importance to link in the two agendas. There cannot be, of course, sustainable development with human rights, and vice versa. For human rights, is very important to sustain and foster the sustainable development agenda. The light blue box is what students see and read on the catalog when choosing my module, and then you see the educational aims, which are a mix of knowledge, of course, base aims, but also that skill transfer that I hope to be able to deliver to students by the end of the module, in terms of what to do, problem solving with these very complex societal problems. Next slide, please, Karen. So we do, as a teaching team, we do put a strong emphasis on delivering a research-based teaching. First of all, of course, because we are a Russell Group university, but not just because of that. We think with these topics in particular, it's very important to offer students the most up-to-date challenges in terms of research and findings that are out there. And we do want, and we try to very much to disrupt what students learn in all other modules in terms of mainstream business knowledge, and to tell them it's all fine, but have you thought about the challenges that come out of an accounting exercise, for example, as Doro was mentioning, in terms of human rights. We adopt a workshop delivery approach, which is a mix of short lecture segments that we deliver, and then activities, group activities. And of course, as we know, in the UK, business schools at undergrad level come with the challenge of numbers. So if you're interested in this specific approach, I can give you the pros and cons of having it. I think at the end of the module, students know more and better what we are talking about, but the delivery is challenging because is something for which you need small groups and activities related to the specific lecture segment that you just delivered. So it's not as straightforward as, of course, a passive, classic, traditional lecture delivery. The module also always got above average feedback from students. I started with only 25 students in 2019, and last year I had 161, so I had to put a cap because it was unmanageable, basically, became unmanageable. But it shows that definitely students are interested in these topics. They do like talking about current challenges and understanding critical aspects to issues that sometimes are presented in a pretty passive way. Next slide, please, Karen. As you can see on the table, I deliver at the beginning foundational lectures on theories and concepts, and then I move on to specific topic and challenge-based lectures. And some of them are related to topics that students are very familiar with, like on social media, but presenting the topic in a way that might be new to them and might be novel to them, like the impacts of social media companies and the responsibilities of social media companies towards both sustainable development and human rights. And then Doro was mentioning the ILO teaching resources. I did use, for example, the fishing, decent working condition in the fishing industry for lecture 8 on workers' rights. What I did wasn't just taking their slides and delivering their slides, because I think, well, you can do that, of course, but I just thought, because we are in the UK and I want to deliver the message to students that, of course, sustainable development challenges and human rights challenges are global, and they are not just for the Thai fishing industry, but they are very much also for the Scottish industry, fishing industry, for example. I slightly changed their slide deck for including a specific case on the Scottish industry. However, their slide deck was absolutely amazing in terms of having a structure ready to go, basically, and knowing which type of learning objectives I should use and which type of activities I could offer students. So I highly recommend the use of those ILO teaching resources. I also included here the coursework, just in case you are thinking about offering a similar module in your university. This is the final attempt. Some of the coursework that I assigned during the years were not ideal, so I came to this conclusion this year, and I think it has been up to now the best solution, both in terms of students to get engaged with the assignment, and also for me, to be honest, with the marking, because I asked them to focus on a specific company or on the of their choice. I learned quite a lot. So I learned human rights and sustainable development policies from companies that I've never heard of, apart from the usual suspects. Next slide, please, Karen. Challenges plenty. As I mentioned, probably the biggest one being this module not being compulsory, but just being elective. I had a challenge, which was for students to make a connection between this module and their future career. So sometimes I asked them, why did you join this module? And the main reasons were, I'm interested in the topics, or I thought it was a cool module, but very few made that connection on, okay, I do have skills that I can reuse in the future in my career. So this year, for the first time, I asked a career expert at the University of Nottingham to join one of the lectures and deliver a specific session on how to sell this module to future employers. And I think it was absolutely amazing. The students loved that session, and she was very practical, actually, and she told them how to write the learning objectives, for example, on their CVs, or how to search for opportunities, job opportunities in this space, for which keywords to search for. So it was very practical, absolutely an amazing session, connecting all the dots between teaching and then what happens next. What's next for the module? The business school Nottingham has been absolutely very supportive of the module, so they decided, with the redesign of the business and management course, to make this module to a 20 credit module, and for final year students that hopefully will also give the opportunity to have more mature conversations with final year students on important topics at the intersection between business and society. And I think I'm running out of time, so next slide just to see my email. Please do get in touch if you are thinking about creating a module, designing a module on business and human rights, or if you just want to have sessions in your traditional modules around human rights. We are very happy to support you as we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lara. And as we pass over to the floor now for questions, I will stop